Hey, everybody. This is Josh,
And this is Shay.
and welcome to the Creative Podcast. So, Shay, who do we have today?
This week we have Kaelin Porter.
Yes, she's a weaver and a textilist, and I think she does a few other creative things. And I'm super excited to talk to her. I don't know much about this craft, so I'm really excited to learn what it takes to design these weaves and these textiles and these blankets that she does by hand and with a loom. So I'm just really excited to figure out what it takes to make this.
I know it's exciting. It's interesting because with our podcast, we get to learn a lot of things about different crafts. And at the same time, you learn to have respect for people's work because some things, you just think, it's just weaving, but it's really not just weaving. So,
Yeah, and there's so much more that goes into it. Like when we were doing our research, we were sitting there talking, and it was like, wait a minute, there's yarn thickness and weight,
yeah.
and depending on what tools you're using is the yarn that you would use and the
Right.
textiles. So I
Yeah.
just can't wait to dig in and ask her all these great questions we got for her.
Okay. Well, with that said, let's introduce Kaelin.
Caitlin, thank you for being here. We are
Yes.
so excited to talk to you.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be
So
here.
we are so excited. I never knew that weaving was so technical. Like looking at our questions, Shay and I were like, oh my God, this is like math.
Yeah, it was like math.
It really is. Yeah, a lot of times when people want to like ask me about like the artist journey, I'm like, oh no, I have to like talk about the concepts. But like the part that really gets me going is actually the technical side of things and sharing what all goes into the process to kind of understand the magic of the textiles.
Wow.
And I mean, before we jump right into the questions though, can I ask you so I see such a trend in people going back to basics of like these weavings and even like macrame, and I see this trend of this almost like nature going back. Does that help with your craft and getting that voice out there?
Yeah, I think so. I think I've seen over the last, I guess, how many years now? At least like 5, 6, 7 years, people starting to embrace some of those older crafts. I think prior to that, there was kind of this negative connotation of like crafts being like your grandma knitting, like tacky sweaters or something like that. And I think there's still a lot of people that think that way, but especially like the Instagram communities that people are building, social media communities, Pinterest even. People are starting to see how much more these really traditional crafts can be modernized and still appreciated in the traditional way, and then incorporated into your lifestyle as a functional good or as a decorative item in your home.
Yeah, because I mean, I feel like for me personally, um, I guess the more I become a consumer, the more I'm conscious of what I consume. I would rather know where my stuff comes from and who made it and what the quality is. And I would pay more for quality than something from like that's fast and just done on a machine. I guess I'm going back to a place where like, do I really need something that is fast market, or could I spend a little more time and do a little more research to find something that is better for the environment, and I know that I'm giving back to somebody that I want to. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
it
And I
does.
think like for this type of thing, for textiles specifically, it's both like the manufacturing, the way it's produced, but also the materials. So
Yes.
if you think about like a lot of people, when you think about yarn, you think about Joann Fabrics
Yeah.
or Hobby Lobby. And the thing about those yarns is most of the yarns in those aisles are made from acrylic, which is essentially based from petroleum, which is oil. So a huge other part of this textiles and weaving conversation is how to go back to using more natural fibers. So we're not using so many harmful chemicals for our home goods, essentially.
That's interesting. So when you say natural fibers, are you talking like, I know this might sound really dumb. I don't even know if I should say it, but is it like,
Yeah.
where does it come from? Trees, like grass? Like what are the natural fibers for yarn?
So some of the most standard natural fibers would be cotton, number one. You know, so many of our clothes are made from cotton. Cotton would be a natural fiber. Wool is a natural fiber. That's from the sheep's, you
Right.
shear the wool and then you can turn it into yarn. And then something that I'll talk about a little bit later is there also are these new fibers called tencel, which are made from trees. So essentially, you can break down the tree similar to a process like you would make paper, but they instead make fiber that can then spin yarn, and it creates this really soft, really drapey yarn without all of the chemicals that are in some of the man-made fibers.
I just have to say, I'm glad you said trees because I was beginning to feel dumb when you started talking cotton and then you're like sheep. And I was like, please, can a tree come in there somewhere?
No, there really is a lot of, even fast fashion brands like H&M are starting to, even though they still use some of those, manufactured processes, they're starting to turn away from polyester fibers towards these tree-based fibers, tree-derived fibers, which would be called like if you see like on your tag, it says viscose or rayon or tencel, all of those came from a tree, basically.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I came from a family who, like my grandma and my aunts growing up, like sewed their own clothes, basically fabric, sewing, quilting, like very traditional crafts were a huge part of the women's work in my life growing up. And so from a young age, I was sewing buttons onto random scraps of fabric and just kind of making things whenever I could. So as that grew and evolved and developed, I tried fashion design growing up and a bunch of other creative pursuits. But how I eventually got to weaving, well, actually, my mom had a loom also when I was growing up for a couple of years there. I never used it when I was young, but all of those like fiber arts, textiles, crafts were around me. And then actually when Aaron and I moved from San Francisco back to Grand Rapids, I was kind of in like an in-between space with my career, and weaving, knitting, textile design had been, a continued interest of mine. So as I was kind of in that in-between space, I decided to take a 1-week weaving workshop at a local yarn shop in Grand Rapids. And I was like, you know what? I don't really have the extra $300 to spend on this, but like this is kind of the only time I think I'm going to be able to try this. So I took a week, learned how to weave with some elderly women in Grand Rapids, and like just within a matter of a few days, I was like, okay, this process like is absolutely amazing. It's so time consuming, it's so lengthy, but it's so meditative, and like I was hooked right away.
That's something I wanted to ask you. There's something about working in these old, like block cutting for me or something like that. There's something that you have to spend so much of your time and it's almost therapeutic for me because you can only focus on that. And it's a very simple focus. It's almost like you said, meditation. So I just wondered if that does have that same kind of thing for you, that meditation feel.
It's so rhythmic and it's so meditative. And like, there's absolutely no way to like, there are no shortcuts. Like I'll talk about it later, but like setting up the loom, like getting ready to weave a project, like there's no way to cheat it. There's no way to like game the system. Like you just have to do all of the work. And I don't know, it's just fascinating.
Not like life. There's no shortcuts.
Sometimes people find them. I don't know.
Yeah.
But now with weaving, you can't cut corners.
No.
So for those who don't understand, like, can you explain like what a loom is, like from the basics, like so someone can like who doesn't know anything about weaving at all?
Yes. Okay. So basically, one question people often ask is like, what's the difference between knitting and weaving? So I'll start there and just say that knitting is when you're actually like, I don't knit very well, but like you're using the sticks to like create knots together. So you're knotting the fabric or the yarn. Weaving is basically a set of warp yarns which go vertically and weft yarns that go horizontally, and you're just like interweaving them. So the most like basic weave structure is just one yarn goes over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under. And then the next yarn goes under, over, under, over, under, over. And it's just this way of interlocking yarns to create a fabric.
So question on that. So if they're going back and forth and it's a simple structure of over, under, on the end, do you have to have a long enough piece of string to go through the whole piece? So like so the ends don't come unraveled on those parts? So like
no, each each time you're putting a weft thread in, there's ways you can secure it. So like you can switch colors and stuff like that.
That's my question. How do you switch colors in those things? Because I've seen some of your work and it's intricate and it changes colors. I'm like, how does you change color when you have to have a long enough string to like weave back and forth to secure that? So there is different ways to secure.
There are ways you can like hide that that color interaction. I also didn't answer your question, Shay, which is what is a loom?
Right.
So basically a loom is any machine that's helping you set up your warp threads with tension so that you can create these interlocking patterns.
Okay.
So for me, I work on a floor loom. It's pretty standard machine. It's like 45 inches wide, 40 inches deep. I'm gonna say, like, if anybody's listening to this, you should just like Google floor loom so you can kind of get it in your brain. It'll make more sense.
Right.
But essentially the machinery assists you in getting all of these warp yarns set up and tensioned so that you can then create patterns with your weft yarn.
Okay. So are looms expensive? Like, let's say if someone is like, oh, you know what, this is kind of interesting, I want to try it out. Are they super expensive? Can you get like low-end ones and, you know, high-end ones, you know, like a starter loom?
You definitely can. So like a lot of times if you think about Pinterest, there's a lot of people that are doing this thing called frame weaving, which is essentially like you get a wooden frame and then you can tension your warp yarns, and then by hand you go over, under with the yarn. So like that's essentially, you can buy a picture frame and put some nails in it, and that will give you like the most rudimentary loom. Now it obviously won't give you like all of the technical capabilities. But going back to me in that weaving class, like I was like, okay, I'm obsessed with this. I didn't have $300 to spend on the class, and I didn't have that money to necessarily spend on a loom, but I figured out how to get it.
Yeah.
And what a lot of people are doing is you end up buying used looms on Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist. That's kind of the best way, I would say, to get into purchasing a loom.
See, that's some good advice. Yeah.
It is. You know, I the only time I've ever done looming was in high school. I did a looming class for a little bit, and it was an Inca loom. Do you know what that is? And it had a long string in the front, and it was like maybe 4 inches by 4 inches, but you made like a little thread like this. But I remember, do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah.
Yeah. I thought you said eagle loom, but you said inkle, right?
Inca loom, like Inca. The Indians. Yeah. So, but I remember like we made these like little like bracelets or something, but you could do it with beads too. So we did it with like beads, and it was, you did the lines, but they had to be so tight, but it took forever to put those little strings together. The more strings you had, the more complicated it was. And, you know, looking at your website, and we'll link to your website, of course, so people can find it. But there was one picture that I was looking at that talking about the looming part. And it was showing how you did almost like, it's a split screen of the loom, and you're doing like almost like an arrow pattern.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so can you explain a little bit, like, because like this pattern that you did, how do you do that in your head first to make sure that you have this beautiful, like, the blanket is gorgeous, like
Absolutely beautiful.
it's gorgeous.
Yeah, so this was one of the first like larger projects that I did once I had like gotten my own loom. So basically on the right side, the yarn that's going vertically, those white yarns, those are the warp that we talk about. And then the taupe yarn, it going over and under in those different patterns, is called the weft. And basically this yarn structure is just like a simple, I might mess this up. I think it's just a simple pointed twill. Okay. So the part of the loom that I haven't talked about is that when you're setting it up, you do this threading process where you put your yarn through what are called different shafts. So then you have petals on the floor that then will coordinate to the shafts that you threaded the yarn through. So like for this pattern specifically is a twill. So like you push down petals 1 and 2, and then you push down petals. So you push down petals 1 and 2, you put a piece of yarn through. You push down petals 2 and 3, you put a piece of yarn through. And then 3 and 4, put yarn through. And then 4 and 1, put yarn through.
See, to our point, it's not that simple. No, it's not that simple. Like that, I'm like trying to concentrate listening to all that. It's not that simple.
And that's the other thing is like, it's so much harder to describe it here sitting in front of a computer, but like if I could bring you into my studio, like it would start to make more sense. That's why I'm like, if this fascinates people as much as I'd love them to listen to me, they should also just like look up a YouTube video to watch someone do it, because it's so great to watch.
Awesome, because it's, you know, we can sit here and talk about it all day, but I would love for our listeners to be able to see actually the process, because it is like so much math. And then like for your patterns, do you sit down and do you design it on paper first, or how do you decide what you're going to do on the loom first? Do you do it for paper, or do you just kind of go into it, or what's your process there?
That process is kind of all over the place. I will say that most of the time as a textile designer, well, it depends on what the project is going to be, but most of the time I have a general idea of what I'm going to do, and then I just kind of try it out and go from there. I do a lot of experimenting on the loom itself. I guess another thing I haven't mentioned is, so I have my large floor loom that's at my studio. It's actually in Indiana right now, so I don't have the large floor loom with me. But when I bought my first used loom, back to the whole buying on Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, is a lot of people, like it's kind of a sad situation where there'll be a woman who used to weave and then she passes away, and then her family's like, okay, we have all of this weaving stuff, like what are we gonna do? So basically I went to this guy's storage unit, and he was like, you can have it all for $500. So I got like a floor loom, a table loom, and all of the supplies that you need, which is like, that was a good deal. It worked out really well.
That's amazing.
So I have this smaller table loom that I can bring with me when I'm, you know, traveling or living in different places. And so I use that for a lot of samples. So I'll just like pull a few different yarns and like do like a mock-up prototype on the sample loom prior to doing like a full run on the floor loom.
Gotcha. So that's where you do your practice and say, this is working from the smaller loom, and then you say, I'm going to take that. But how do you write down stuff so you remember? Because it's mathematical here.
Yeah. So there's a whole like pattern drafting process. And that was part of learning to weave, was like also learning to like how exactly to read those drafts. Because this is such a like an ancient traditional art, there's so many different patterns that are already available. So I have a few different pattern reference books where I'll like, I usually start there as references and be like, okay, I want to go in this general direction. And then I do a lot of more experimentation with like the patterns and the yarn colors than the actual structure of the weave itself.
So this might seem a little strange question, but depending on the climate, do you use different fibers and different yarns? Like, let's say if you were weaving for a place like near the desert, does that affect like the fiber? Does it expand? Is there any kind of effects on whether you're like, let's say, making a blanket for someone in a colder climate or a climate which is more extreme in temperatures?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say in general, you kind of like think about like a wool sweater. Like if I'm doing something for, like, I don't know about like how it changes with like the actual fiber.
Right.
But if I was going to do something for a colder climate, you would maybe stick to wools, which are naturally insulating. And then if you're going to be in a cool climate, cottons are great, linens are great. You know, we have like linen resort wear. There's a reason
Right.
they wear that where it's warm. And then also the tencel yarn that I talked about that's made from trees is also really light and airy and would work well in a cooler climate. An example of that is I have two baby blankets on my website that are for sale right now, and one of them was made with wool and would be more of like a traditional like warm blanket, and then the other one is made with cotton and tencel and would just be like a little bit of a lighter, cooler, you know, if you're gonna take your baby for a walk in the summer, like it would be a less less warming and more just, you know, comforting kind of blanket.
These baby blankets are beautiful. You should check them out. They're not like, I don't know how to explain them. They're very artistic. I think they're beautiful. I love the color choices that you did that are not these traditional like blue and pink. You know, like you pick colors that could go general, what am I trying to say?
Gender neutral. Yeah.
But I just think that these are blankets that you could have, and these are things that I would keep for my baby, or you know, people would keep for their babies and make it a keepsake once they're done. They look durable, but they're so darn cute. And
I want to get one for my niece. She's a newborn, like 3 months old, And I want to get one for her. Can people order like custom, like let's say, could you make me a purple one, or is it just what you have online?
I'm definitely open to custom work as we continue to talk about the process. As long as people's timeframes are a little bit long.
Yeah.
I have done customs, and I love working with people closely. But it could, depending on like, especially for like a baby blanket, if I'm away from the floor loom, it could be,
Oh, wow.
6 to 8 weeks depending.
Yeah. So like how we were talking earlier, like, so you have all these yarns from like Joanne Fabric and all this stuff. Do you dye your own yarns? Like, so you know where the dye is coming from? Or do you have a place? Because I see that you sell yarn on your site as well too, or I don't know if it's yarn, it's tencel.
I am planning on doing like a test run of some of that. I have some friends that are really into natural dyeing. My friends at SO Studio, they do like silk scarves, wallpaper designs, some really great stuff. So we're hoping to do like a custom line of hand-dyed yarn for that. Other than that, as far as where my yarns come from, most of the time I'm sourcing from, every once in a while I'm shopping online. There's a few different reputable yarn shops, but there's also a place in Michigan that sells mill-end yarn. So basically they buy large lots of yarn from textile manufacturers in like North Carolina, kind of like leftover yarns. Well, leftover makes it sound bad. There's lots of great yarns there. So I go there and go treasure hunting to find like really great fibers, really great colors. And a lot of times those are man-made, or not man-made, they're natural fibers, but have been dyed in some sort of like factory process.
Have you done the process of actually making yarn? Have you done that before?
No.
No. Okay.
No, I haven't decided if I want to. There were like 5 or so years ago, I thought I wanted to start spinning yarn, but I'm like,
that's a whole nother animal to take on. Yeah.
It's a whole other animal.
Yeah.
I have this dream of like someday I want to like have a farm and have like sheeps and alpacas and like shear the wool, turn it into yarn, weave a blanket and sell it and do like the whole thing.
That's a beautiful dream.
It would just take so long, but it sounds like fun.
Your blanket will be ready in 2025.
Exactly.
I have to raise lambs, and then I got to get them up to feed.
Yeah, the 8-month lead time, or the 8-week lead time turns into like an 8-year lead time. But maybe at some point I will spin the yarn itself myself, but I'd rather just develop like
your skill,
fiber,
and then have like a manufacturing process do the rest.
Well, maybe you should get in contact with, sourcing out from, like a sheep farm that doesn't kill their sheep and stuff like that, and do the sharing. You build that relationship so you don't have to worry about that,
Right. And that was part of, so the tencel yarn that I have on my site, Rio, was actually a yarn that I developed with a few different mills earlier at the beginning of the pandemic. So that was kind of like my pandemic project. Was I couldn't find this tencel yarn in the right weight that I wanted it in. So I went through a few different contacted like 15 manufacturers to find the one that would be able to create that final yarn for me.
And people can buy that on your site, right?
Yes. That was like part of, I'm wanting to share my weavings with the world, but I'm also wanting to share these new fibers with the weaving community. And in that process of like talking to all those manufacturers, I also, ended up, there's these like really small sheep farms who also have these fiber processing plants. So I got to learn like all of the ins and outs of, different kinds of yarn production. It was a blast.
Wow. Is there any yarn, I guess, that's harder to work with than other, like, is tencel harder to deal with than, let's say, cotton or
So tencel and cotton, I would say, are probably the easiest to work with yarns. They're both, especially tencel, super strong and durable. So like they're not going to break. Wool is a little bit more fragile. I actually don't do a lot of weaving with wool in general. Every once in a while I will. I stick to a lot of the cellulose fibers, which are the ones that are made from plants. I'm trying to think. I know like if you think about yarns that have like a really thin texture, I think maybe like a mohair or like an alpaca that are like a little bit lighter, those are going to be more likely to break in the loom and give you problems there.
Do they ever break? Like, let's say you've gone let's say I'm just thinking of like a blanket, right? You go so far, like maybe halfway, and then you look back and you see one that, you know, like a quarter of the way, like snapped or broke. Like, does that happen often? And do you have to like go back and redo it?
All the time. What's less so the breaking. Like with breaking, I've been able to find ways to solve that problem. Usually it's like you add a new yarn and you can like hang it from the back. It's kind of complicated. But what happens is in the threading process, which is part of setting up the loom, that's where I'm most likely to make mistakes. So like if you're trying to thread the yarn 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4, halfway through you'll have a 1 2 3 3 1 2 3 4. So what you'll do is you'll get halfway through the blanket and you'll be like, oh, this was looking really good, but there's this like one line that like keeps going off course, and those are the worst.
So then what do? Do you just kind of let it go? Like, you know, like as designers, there's certain things where you see something and you're like, damn it. But okay, I'm letting it go, or I need to go back and fix it.
So this is actually the main reason why I've waited so long to start selling my goods. Like I started weaving in 2018 and like I'll post them on Instagram and people are like, oh my gosh, I want to buy them. I want to buy them. And I'm like, okay, I know this looks great, but like what I'm not showing this picture is this part.
There's 20 other blankets behind me that did not work out.
This is where I'm just going to be honest and say like, I have a lot of things that I'm like, okay, this looks mostly great, but like there's this glaring production error that like I can't sell. Like I can't in good conscience sell this. Like a lot of people might not notice it, but like as the person who made it, I'm like, I can't let this out the door.
But you know that,
oh, go ahead.
I feel like it's almost interesting because let's say years down the line, when people have your pieces, that mistake can actually add to the fact that it was handmade, like someone made it and crafted it, right? Versus a factory made thing that's always 100% perfect. So sometimes we look at those little things as an error, but let's say this is passed down generations down the line, that's a thing that can actually make it more like original, like it was, you know, made by an artisan rather than a computer generated factory item.
That's what people always say. And I'm like, I don't know, I go back and forth because it's like, I'm good with like small mistakes. But sometimes if it's like big enough, I'm like, I can't. I guess a big way to say this is like, if the warp is messed up, you'll have like a whole line of mistakes. So kind of like if you think about like a glitch, like you'll focus in on like, oh, that's a glitch. If you just make a mistake in the weft and it's just like one yarn, like I can find ways to fix that, or like those I'm like, it's fine. Like nobody's really gonna
notice. Yeah.
So kind of it goes back and forth. But I did have, so when I launched the website, you know, I've been working on launching, I first started launching or developing and launching the yarn earlier this year, and then wanted to also start offering woven goods for, you know, the people that have been, oh, I really want some of this. So I'm starting to do like small batches of consumer products that people can purchase. And those baby blankets were one of the first full run production items that I like was able to weave one, and I was like, there are no mistakes on the blanket. Like,
congratulations.
Yeah,
it took me like 2 years to get there, but I was like, this is awesome.
Wow. They're beautiful. You've done a great job with them.
Thank you.
So I have one of your pieces, and I feel very, very lucky to have one of your pieces. It's called Freeways, and it's kind of where you and I met in Michigan, and the whole thing. Are you still doing? That's not on a weaving machine, though, right? Those are hand knots, right?
That was a macrame, right?
Macrame.
So all hand knotted.
Josh, can you use your computer to show everyone the piece you're talking about?
Yeah, I'll put it up on her Creator page. She has some beautiful pictures that she did with it. And it's just, I love that piece. Are you still doing pieces like that if somebody wanted something? Because I know that wall art has become so huge. Like I went over to a friend's house on Friday night, and I looked at her walls, and she had like 5 or 6. She's
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, I bought that one, and I bought that one at a craft thing or whatever. And like wall art is just, the weaving of wall art is so big right now.
Uh-huh. I'm not, as far as macrame goes, I'm not going that direction. If somebody wants, like, I'm definitely interested in doing like woven wall art. I want to stick to the loom.
Yeah.
I learned macrame actually with a great, amazing macrame artist, Sally England. I interned with her in 2013, a while ago, and was able to work on some really great projects for Derek Lamb and some of her other interior design projects. So that's where I learned macrame, and was one of the ways that I started to know how to express myself in that new like fiber textile way. And it was fun to do work like that, but I didn't want to continue going down that road. I wanted to kind of find a new way to express myself. And when I found the loom, I was like, okay, this is the way that I want to do that. So I'm still interested in doing wall art. It'll take different forms than the macrame.
Gotcha. Well, I feel very lucky then. I got one of your macrame.
I'm so glad you got it too. That is such a good piece. I loved making it.
So with that said, so where do you see, like, let's say if you could put out your ultimate dream in terms of your craft, where do you see yourself going? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do with it?
I saw this question on the sheet and I was like, oh, I think I'm just going to be very honest and say, like, I'm still not entirely sure. I feel so early on in the journey, and what I'm really trying to do is put all of the feelers out there and figure out what continues to make me feel like as good as it felt to sit at the loom for the first time. So that can go in like a couple different directions. I can see it manifesting as making, like high-end decorative wall art, like you were talking about, Josh, or it could be functional goods like baby blankets, hand towels, potentially partnering with, larger organizations who, have a broader internet reach. It could also look like working with, I don't know, like the contract commercial textile design, by, designing fabrics for them. All of those things are things I'd be interested in. I'm just like right now gonna do what I'm doing, continue putting it out there, and seeing where that goes. All along also continuing to work on yarn development and fiber development, because the material portion of this process is also so interesting to me. I have dreams and aspirations, but mostly it just includes continuing to be able to put this work out in whatever way that is. Because this was kind of a prior, so I lost my job in March during the COVID-19 pandemic, like a lot of people. And I was working in a design capacity, but in a corporation, not doing product design. I was doing like innovation and strategy design. And while it was enjoyable, like I knew that the next thing that I wanted to tackle was textile design and product design, to get so close with the color and materials and how I can continue to share that with the world. So at this point, I'm just really happy that every day I get to wake up and that's what I get to do.
That's amazing. And I think even for our listeners who, like in you just answering that question, it just opened up like a whole world of where you can go in this space. You talked about, product design, you talked about, just the textiles, like you can go into wall art, like even for someone who wants to do weaving and they don't know what options there are. You mentioned quite a few different spaces you can go into just in this space alone, which is amazing.
Yeah, there's a lot of different avenues and a lot of different roads. And I'm just, since I'm so early on, like I'm just not at the point where I'm ready to cross any of the options off. I'm kind of deciding, you can go a lot further if you choose a road and just, narrowly focus down it, but I'm still just gonna go like 4 or 5 different paths at once. And like, I don't know.
That's kind of like us. You're kind of enjoying the journey and the process. And yeah, and there are many ways that it can lead, and the right way will reveal itself once you've explored, all these different options.
Right. I think to me right now, the most important thing is that I'm getting up every morning and like pushing forward in one way or another with this. when I'm like catching up with old friends, they're like, so what are you up to? And I just always say like, I'm on my textile journey. Because
I
like,
love it.
it's hard to know what to say. Like, oh, like I weave during the day. It's like, that doesn't always sound so elegant. So I just tell them I'm on my textile journey, and it feels good.
I think that, I think there's such a lot of people don't even know where things come from. And when you get down to the root of where things come from, like, my background going into eyewear, like people don't understand what it takes to make an acetate. You just think that you get this plastic. No, that's not the process. It is you come up with color combinations, you heat it up, you put it through this process, and then you have to put it through a milling thing where it actually gets a nice soft, gloss on it, depending on how long you're at this machine. And I mean, that machine, you spend hours on that piece of plastic to get that nice little shine on it, or a dull shine, or a matte finish. But people don't realize where all this stuff like really comes from. And it is very interesting to think about, like, from what animal to the process to how it's made to how it's dyed to how it comes to you, and then this is the final product. I think is such, and textiles are always just a different way of looking at things. Do you ever think about like trying, like, I know that they're doing like a lot of things with like bamboo, and there's something from a sugar cane down on the islands that they've been using for like sneaker soles and like laces. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Are you talking about Allbirds?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, Allbirds, they have such an interesting and like
They blow my mind.
sensitivity to materials. And actually, so when I was learning about this tencel yarn, it was the first time I used it was at this weaving class, and that was in 2018, right when Allbirds was releasing their tree runners. Yeah.
Yep.
They're like, the fabric itself is made from trees, and then the plastic is made from sugarcane. I haven't ever been able to like access any of the sugarcane because I don't need.
You can write to him like, hey, let me work on some textiles for the outside of the shoe. I'm a weaver. Help me.
Exactly. Yeah, so there's just so many different interesting things. The yarn that so I started with Tencel as far as yarn development goes. The next one that I really want to work on, there's this new fiber called sea cell, which is essentially similar to a Tencel, so it's based in trees, but it also has part seaweed in it.
Oh.
But like it still turns out this like really great white color, has this like really, I don't know, subtle sheen to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm working with finding the right manufacturing partners for that project. But that one will be really fun.
The website kind of reminds me of, I think it's called Citizenry, where they go. Do you know that website?
I've seen them on Instagram, but I don't know like the whole story of them.
Well, they're kind of like you in the sense that you're going to make something, and then once it's done, you move on to another product. I'm guessing it's how your website is going to go. Like, so once the baby blankets are sold out, they're done, and you're going to move on to a new blanket, right?
Yes.
So,
yeah. I don't have the attention span. I've been actually going back and forth about that. Like, okay, should I do collections or should I do complete like one-offs? And like in the future, I hope to do like small limited collections. But yeah, that'll pretty much be like a small batch of this collection, and then whatever's next comes next.
Because I'm sure you would run out, because I'm sure like with your process, you're never going to get that same green that you have in that baby blanket. So it's going to have to be, you could have the same pattern, but the colors would have to shift a little bit. So it wouldn't be the same run. So each one would be unique.
Right.
Yeah.
Very cool. So, I mean, I love their site. So I think you're on the right path though. So where would you tell somebody to start with the weaving? Like if they wanted to get into it, what would you say would be the first thing? Knitting or crocheting or getting a little loom?
I guess it depends on what their like end goal is. But if their end goal is that they want to be weaving in a floor loom, I would say if you have the means and if you have the schedule flexibility, like find a 1-week workshop. Like that workshop like solidified it for me. Okay. The intricacies of learning how to weave are, some people teach themselves based on YouTube videos and books, but like the process is so complicated. I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't rely on some sort of experts to help you along.
I'd be tangled in that weave machine. I try to do it myself.
I'm trying to think, like if I did it the first time without having anybody there who like knew what was going on, I'd be like, this is really what I'm supposed to be doing? Like, this is insane. This process is bonkers. So I would say like that's the best thing. if you're just interested in dabbling, I would say find a frame loom on the internet, do some looking into that, start to learn about like how the patterns work, and then maybe like the first, like you asked earlier about like if there are different like levels of looms. I would say a frame loom is like the most basic rudimentary one that you can start to experiment with, and then next is called a rigid heddle. I've never worked with one. They have more capabilities than a frame loom, not as many capabilities as like a floor loom does, but still allows you to start experimenting with different patterns and yarn structures without being quite as complicated as the floor loom.
So we didn't put this in the questions, but you said something interesting. You said that you learn to express yourself through weaving, right? What is the part of the whole process that allows you to express yourself the most and be like your most creative self? Like, which part do you enjoy most that allows you to just like express yourself creatively?
That's a good question. So, because like you said, the whole process is really mathematic and can seem very technical. So it's like, okay, where exactly is the art coming through?
Right.
For me, like after I got down the technical side of things, it's just been experimenting with different yarn and color interactions. I love the idea of color science and how the subtleties of like getting the perfect blue and just the right different, hues all together. As I started out weaving, I was working with a lot more neutrals, but just even in the last couple months, I've really been pushing the ideas of, okay, how can I get like the 3 weirdest looking colors and like try to like get a pattern that actually makes them shine and makes them look beautiful. So like that I'm like right now is like the thing of like, okay, how can I get this really weird like green gold, this like super soft pink, and like this bright blue to like all come together and like really make this like awesome pattern. So that's like my current challenge and like the current thing that makes me feel like, oh wow, like look, I just made this crazy color and and it works, it's weird, but it works.
Yeah, I mean, looking at your color combinations like on your website right now, like the lavender and white lilac, or the lilac and white. I mean, I love how you go into these almost chunky parts to very intricate, like back and forth, is very quick, and then just a large, like how do you, like, I love how I can see the artistry right off the bat with like how you take the yarn and it's like you have like equal part white, equal part lilac, and then you go into mostly white, and then you go into mostly lilac, and the way that you shift each knot and each layer into this pattern, it's beautiful. And how it even gets like chunkier and like more like towards the end, I'm looking at the lilac one, you had these big white chunky knots or weaving at the end, and then maybe like middle way through, you have these really tight lilac ones that you can't see any of the white. And I just love how you do that color shift through it. And then there's some like chartreuse in there or yellow.
Yeah, I got this. It was actually, I got it online, but it was just like this large cone of like neon, like tennis ball yarn.
Yeah.
And I'm just absolutely obsessed with how I can like add it in like little ways to just be like, hello, I'm a tennis ball. I think it just like adds, I don't know, it just to me is so fun to be able to, kind of incorporate all these different things. I think that weaving was something I worked on like in the springtime. So, it's like everything's kind of new and fresh and invigorating. And I've got a bunch of other, some like weird color combinations of stuff that's not on the site yet that was kind of in the sample phase. I'm trying to get it into the production realm so that I can sell products with it.
So do you do everything by yourself right now? Do you get any kind of help from anybody?
I am pretty much all by myself right now. I guess the only exception is my husband does like a lot of like my web development stuff. So right now we have like a first run of the website that's up and we use like a Shopify template, but he's working on doing like a custom site. So I'll continue to, post some like website updates. So he's helping with a lot of the tech stuff. He's a UX designer, so he can help there. And then other than that, my mom helps with some shipping, which is nice.
But the weaving itself, like the product, like doing the actual work, that's a lot of work, a lot of time. So to think that you're doing all of that, like the mock-up stuff that you do before, that is a lot of work that you're putting in.
Yeah, it takes a lot of time, but luckily I enjoy it, so it's great.
Yes.
Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge on this craft and this art.
Gosh, we're not done. We got 2 more questions.
Oh, two more. I'm sorry.
Do you have any words of wisdom or things you've learned on your journey about life, pursuing your passion, or just anything that like maybe you didn't learn in school that you'd like to share with our listeners? Anything?
I would say my biggest advice, or like the thing that keeps me going, is back to like what I was saying about the loom setting up process, which is like you can't cut corners. Like if you want to do something, like you just have to wake up and do it. And sometimes it's like very uninspiring to me, but it's like, okay, just do it, explore, and just figure out a way. I think this year for a lot of people has been, there's been a lot of hardships. And so for me, that was, losing my job. But I kind of was just like, how can I figure out how to twist this around into like something that's positive? And for me, that was, you know what, I finally get to go on this textile journey. So I would say keep your eyes open for when and where to pursue, kind of what your dream is. And I wouldn't say be stupid and like quit your job and like run away, but like, keep your eyes open for when the opportunity is there. And like, in the meantime, take the small steps that you need to get there. Because the thing is if I hadn't been putting, like the weaving for me was, more of a hobby the last 2 years when I was, working full time. But if I hadn't put in that time to kind of set the base for everything, like I wouldn't have had the foundation to really pursue that this year. So that was really nice.
That makes a lot of sense.
Oh, thank you.
And then lastly, Josh, are you going to ask the final question?
Yes. What does being a creator mean to you?
What does being a creator mean to me? Oh, geez. It just means, like, for me, it just means, once again, like, literally showing up, like, allowing myself to be vulnerable with my ideas, with my craft, with, like, the work that I've done. Because, like, for me, this weaving process is, like, so, like I said at the beginning, like, meditative, and, like, it's, like, such a good time to, like, be with yourself and with your thoughts. So, like, every piece feels like a part of me. So then you get to the end and you have your mistakes, or if it's perfect, it's still like, it's really scary to share this with the world and say like,
It is so
I made this.
Please accept this.
please like it, or please buy it, or it's like it's hard to do that sometimes. So I think for me, it's just being a creator is being vulnerable, being willing to put myself out there, building a community of people who are doing the same. Yeah.
I love that, because it's true.
Beautifully said.
Very beautifully said. I mean, it touches me because that's literally us too. We're doing this, but I don't know, please like it.
I think there's like this, there's this, especially when you're starting out, there's this idea from a lot of people of like, oh, like I saw these people get famous on YouTube, or I saw these people get famous on Instagram, and people just assume that like, oh, like that's so easy, like everybody can do it. And it's like, it's a lot of work. So like, you just got to show up and go, please accept this.
That's the new thing. Yes, I love it.
But you just have to do it every day. And like, I am not in the spot where I feel like I've hit that, like where I want to be, but I'm going to like continue doing it. And
that's so fascinating, because from our point of view, we see your work and we're like, oh yeah, you're an expert, this is amazing. But then you still feel like there's room for growth, there's more to learn. So it's just like, I guess it never ends, trying to be the best that you can possibly be and put out the best you can possibly. It's the process.
Yeah, the journey never ends. But who knows? Catch up with me in 5 years. Maybe it'll be great, or maybe I'll be.
It will be great.
Working at giant fabrics.
So, could you let people know, like, just to tell them your Instagram, your website, and all that information, so they can follow you and keep up to date with everything going on with you?
Definitely. I would love if you guys would follow along on Instagram. My handle is @okay, which is okae.studio. You can find my website at www.okay.studio. No .com after that, just okay.studio. And yeah, I think the best way to follow me and keep up with me right now is on Instagram. And then, like we said earlier, if anybody's interested in contacting for like a custom piece, definitely open. So you can DM me, shoot me an email, whatever works.
And we will link to all this on her creator page as well too, for everybody to follow you, like you, support you, and
Except this.
yeah.
Yes.
And we really appreciate you taking the time and being
Yes.
vulnerable with us and sharing your journey. We are glad to be a part of your journey, and we look forward to seeing what's next for you. And just keep in touch with us, and we know that you will do well. There's no guessing for us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
And yeah, remember, Josh, what is the line?
The line is, it's more than art, it's life.
Imagine
Imagine more.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys.